All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming down tonight. We are live from Books and Books in Coral Gables, Florida. So a note to our internet audience watching at home. If at any time during the presentation you'd like to purchase a copy of tonight's book, you can just call the number on your screen. We'll take care of that for you. We'll have the author sign it, and we will ship it to wherever you are in the United States free of charge. This evening, Books and Books is very happy to welcome Mr. David Keil and his new book, Functional Anatomy of Yoga, a guide for practitioners and teachers. Mr. Keil was introduced to yoga in 1989 by his Tai Chi Chuan teacher. As an instructor of kinesiology, the study of movement and musculoskeletal anatomy, at Miami's Educating Hands School of Massage from 1999 to 2003, he developed a fun, informal, and informative style of teaching. In this book, Mr. Keil enables both the casual reader and the seasoned practitioner to understand and implement the anatomical structure and function of the body in yoga. Written with a conversational tone, the book delivers the complex subject of human anatomy in a way that is both provocative and clear. Here to tell us more about it, please give a very warm welcome to Mr. David Keil.
Good evening. Thank you for coming and showing up at the book launch. I'd also like to quickly thank Christina, who helped organize with Books and Books for me, and of course my wife Gretchen for all of her support over the years while I put together this book. It's been a long journey. So usually when I teach workshops, I refrain from doing any type of biography of myself. I feel like there's such a limited amount of time and kind of need to get to the information. And I remember trying to skip it once, and a student came up to me and they convinced me to do some type of biography of my story. And afterwards she said, you should never discount your story, because a lot of people find inspiration in people's personal stories. So I was thinking about what I was going to talk about this evening, what parts I might read. And I thought I'd start with my story, but put it together in maybe a slightly different way than I normally do. So my introduction to yoga was back in 1989. I was working at a restaurant on Sunny Isles called Artichokes. And there was a patron there named Dr. Bob Bacher, who ended up being my first Tai Chi teacher. And as it turns out, he's the same person who introduced me to yoga many years ago. And Bob was basically my first mentor in movement and understanding my own body. And I think it really informed me and the way I understand anatomy now and the way that I teach yoga to everyone. He sent me off to university with Shivananda Companion to Yoga. Kind of pushed me out there and said, go for it, go practice, do your Tai Chi, do whatever. And I went to university, and then I came back to Miami, and I decided sometime during university that I wanted to be an acupuncture physician. And for those of you who know me, I'm not an acupuncture physician. But what I did do was I decided to go to Educating Hands School of Massage, and I thought that would be a good segue into that sort of level of healthcare. And this was another sort of pivotal moment. I didn't know it at the time, but Educating Hands, afforded me this opportunity and introduced me to anatomy, because I didn't study anatomy in university. And one of the people who I met there was a man named Nick Chitty, who's sitting here today. And he was kind of my second mentor. And he taught me how to apply anatomy to human bodies. And that was extremely important. And of course, this period of time was essential for me, because after I graduated from Educating Hands, they invited me back to be a teacher. And it was while I was a teacher that I learned to present anatomy to people that really had no scientific background other than high school biology. And on top of that, having gone through the program, I was not only knowing and understanding anatomy in my mind, but I was working on people, as I said, and also I started to practice more yoga. And so I kind of had these three things coming together very strongly, which was knowing it, feeling it in my own body, and then feeling it in other people. So all of this really converged in a way that I didn't realize at all at the time. And the good thing about Educating Hands is it's all about integration. Their whole program is really set up around interconnectedness of the body, of how you work with people, how you deal with them, how you treat them. So this is kind of the theme that underlies all of the work that I do now. It was also at Educating Hands that I met a woman named Karen Schachter who introduced me to my current practice, which is Ashtanga Yoga. And she was there doing the kinesiology portion of the program, and I had substituted, I believe, in a night class, in the class that she was in. And she asked me to tutor her in the anatomy section, and specifically the kinesiology. So I started tutoring her. We ended up doing an exchange for body work and massage treatments. And she's the person who convinced me to do my first yoga anatomy workshop. And I did that workshop here in Coconut Grove at Yoga Grove, and Marisa is here. I'm sure she remembers that. It's when she had the studio with Ryan many years ago. So another kind of pivotal moment that, of course, I didn't realize at the time. All these little stories, all these little pieces in my stories, start to add up. And after I started doing yoga anatomy workshops, I think from that point I probably sent out some flyers, like literally through the mail. And I got maybe 3 or 4 little teaching jobs, teaching anatomy on some small teacher training courses. This is back in 99, 2000. And I think the timing was really perfect to be putting myself out there in that way. And before I knew it, I was getting invitations from lots of different places, and of course it's all grown. And early on in that stage in 2001 is when I hit my next pivotal moment, which was meeting my teacher, John Scott, who's sort of the next mentor in my little progression. And when I met John, it was kind of, he had been practicing Ashtanga Yoga for about 20 years at that point. And he knew his body so well. I mean, he knew all the anatomy. There was no question about it. He just didn't know any of the names. He didn't know the details. But I did. And so we kind of had this convergence of minds. And he quickly invited me to teach a little class. While I was there practicing with him for 2 weeks, and he invited me to teach a class one evening. So I went and I did that. And then his wife and him invited me to teach on teacher training courses that they were doing. And so it started this long progression until now. I still go every year, at least once a year I see John Scott and I teach anatomy on his teacher training course. And at that point, John really taught me what my yoga practice was all about. And it was another story of integration. In that case, it was an integration of breath, bandha, dristi, for those of you who don't know what those things are. Particular way of breathing that we do in the practice. Bandhas are the energetic controls that we use internally, and a very particular type of breath that we do in the practice and synchronize with our movements. And he opened up so many doors to my practice, and this began the real deep internal exploration of my anatomy. I had already had an inkling of it. And John also quickly told me that I needed to go to Mysore to meet at the time the guru of Ashtanga Yoga, whose name was Pattabhi Jois. And so in 2002, I made my first trip to Mysore, and I started practicing with Pattabhi Jois and his grandson Sharat. And this period in time, I mean, I was, gung-ho, going for it in my practice, and really digging deep through the anatomy. And it really set me up, all of these pieces really set me up to eventually write this, which comes from not just knowing anatomy, but experiencing anatomy. And I think it's very similar to what yoga asks of us. It's not yoga isn't something we do. Yoga is something we experience. Yoga is something that starts to unfold inside of us. And this whole process and all of these parts and pieces of my life that fit together to make this happen is the exact way that I decided to write this book, and the point of view that I took when I approached the anatomy. We often think about our anatomy in parts and pieces, but it's false. It's just a construct that we've created to try to understand it. And of course, to some degree, that is definitely necessary. We need to break it down in order to talk about it, and of course I do that in the book. But the truth is something completely different. And most people don't realize that, or they forget, I should say, that the body has formed, and the parts and pieces are just what we've made up. So I'm going to read a little section from the introduction of the book. Let me grab a little water first. We need to remember that our body started its formation with yoga. The literal translation of the word is usually yoking or joining. It is when the sperm meets the egg that the first physical yoking begins in our own body. From this point, a single cell is formed. From that single cell, every bone, muscle, organ, piece, and part has formed out of cell division. The body did not name its own parts. That's something we humans have done. So as the body functions as a whole, rather than as an assembly of individual parts, we need to approach it as a whole. There is a similar issue in approaching yoga from an anatomical perspective. While it is hoped that any serious student will study all of yoga's 8 limbs, because this is the anatomy book, we deal exclusively with only one limb. That's asana, or the posture practice. Most yoga students today enter the path of yoga via asana. This is neither good nor bad. Asana is a great way to engage with the whole of yoga. Yoga does not care how we interact with it. That we are interacting with it on any level suggests it will lead us through the whole of the practice over time. As practitioners, it is important that we do not get stuck in asana. It's definitely possible. There's a lifetime of work to do fully understanding and experiencing these postures, and studying anatomy can add to this natural emphasis on the physical. It is not my intention to get you stuck in your thinking mind or your body. As you read, I hope you will take this information and experience it for yourself, thereby merging your intellect with your physicality. As you read, allow your understanding of what anatomy means to expand. Begin to explore your body as an integrated whole. As you practice, experience asanas not as individual postures, but as elements that are related to one another in the context of a greater whole. In summary, this book will encourage you to explore your understanding of anatomy via the personal laboratory that is your own body. As a result, you will become a more mindful practitioner and a better teacher. If I do my job well, you will be inspired to continue your study of anatomy, your practice, and yourself well beyond the pages of this book. And this idea of joining and process, happening, evolution on an individual basis happening, very much mirrors what the seed of yoga is meant to do. It's meant to unfold over a long period of time. I have a section just after the introduction called Converging Histories. And this is, as far as I know, I made up this story myself. I haven't read it anywhere else. It's kind of like taking the bigger perspective on how we get to where we are. And it's very important as a teacher, and this is where I use this information mostly, which is trying to understand the student that's in front of me and recognizing that they have this convergence of things going on that has led them to that moment in their life. Things like, we could go as far back as just talking about evolution and the fact that we're walking around on 2 legs, puts us in a very particular position, makes our body function in a very fundamental and basic way. Genetics that we come in with, whether we have proportional things going on or, long torso, short femurs, or tight hips, or flexible hips, or tight shoulders, all of the variation that we come with is, and of course as similar as we are, we're all quite different. Physical life experiences that we've done. Activities, for instance. Anybody who's been a dancer or a gymnast has some very deeply ingrained neuromuscular patterns that are designed to help them do those activities. So the longer we've done them, the more fully we've done them, the more ingrained those patterns are. And you can see these things appearing on the yoga mat. Injuries that we've had over the years also affect our physicality, mental, emotional, all kinds of levels within us, and affect how we stand on the mat and how we move through our practice as well. Even emotional and energetic bodies get caught up in this entanglement of integration of who we are. And when you start to be able to pull these things apart, it makes it easier to treat students as individuals, to assess them, to help them, to move them forward based on not my preconceived idea of how things are supposed to be, but instead on how they are, who they are, how they function, what issues they have going on, what their strengths or weaknesses are. This is how I always approach my teaching, not trying to make everybody fit into a box. And so as much as we can study anatomy and think that we're all very similar, the nuanced detail of how different we are is not always so easy to see. So it's my hope that this book brings some light onto some of those nuanced differences. I'll read a little section from Converging Histories as well. When we look at a student, we are seeing the product of these converging histories, beginning to observe what shows up inside and out. In the moment is the best way to see someone. Learning to see beyond the body is part of learning to teach yoga. As we become able to see beyond the body, we become better able to see our students as they are in the moment. But we need to keep in mind that sometimes, perhaps in a large class situation, individuality can be lost and everyone is given the same instruction for the same pose despite their individual differences. So how do we treat each student as an individual? Each pose has its basic principles and guidelines. For instance, everyone should rotate their thigh outward or inward and engage this or that in a given pose, right? How do we layer these fundamentals with our consideration of who a particular student is right now in this moment? And how can we move our students from where they are now to where we think they should be in a way that suits them and is specific to them? How many of these histories are you able to see when you watch your students practice, or are you aware of in your own practice? Should students do or not do certain postures on the basis of their personal histories? How do these histories fit into students' development in the practice of asana as well as the larger picture of yoga? These are just a few of the things to consider. Let's leave it at this. It is enough that you begin to look for these pieces of the puzzle in your students. It is enough that you try to see beyond the body. So when I set up the book, it's basically in two parts. The first part goes through the sections of the body, foot and ankle, knee, hip joint, all that kind of stuff, the pelvis, the spine. And then the second part of the book is about the postures themselves. And I really try to approach this in a way that hasn't been done before. I'm generally not interested in doing things the way other people do them. If everybody's going that way, I usually go that way. That's just my nature. So in the second half of the book, I was looking for this sense of interconnectedness again. And what I realized was that it's the anatomy that interconnects the postures as well. And so what I did was I broke the postures, I broke the postures down into sections based on anatomical patterns. So I did 5 sections. I did anatomical patterns in forward bends, external hip rotation such as lotus or leg behind head, twisting, arm balances, and back bends. And it's these fundamental patterns that we do in our yoga practice that if you look closely enough, you see how interconnected all forward bends are. All twists are interconnected. All arm balances forearm, headstand, all of it. It's all connected together. So what are the anatomical pieces that make those connections happen? And that's the way I wrote the book, because I wasn't really so interested in taking a posture and talking about what muscle is contracting and which one is lengthening. As interesting as that can be, I have a feeling what it does is lead people to just say what muscle is contracting or what should be contracting or what should be lengthening without the sort of deeper level understanding. So it's my hope that this book helps people find a new perspective and way of thinking about the practice, thinking about how the postures interconnect with one another. So not only does my life story interconnect with itself, the anatomy interconnects, and the postures interconnect as well. We'll take any questions if there's any. Somebody has to get it started. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about going beyond the body as you related, maybe sort of the link between the physical, anatomical, and going beyond? What are your sort of first thoughts about that? I'm very new to this, so just...
Yeah. It could be that's a question that could have a very big answer. But since we're kind of talking anatomy, I'll kind of keep it in that direction a little bit. And I have this in the book as well, and I say it in my workshops. When you look at yoga, what you really find out is that it's all about the nervous system. Any way you approach it, you both have to use and confront the nervous system. So I usually go to the two ends of the spectrum. Meditation practice. You're not doing any postures other than one. And what you come up against is your mind. And, you could easily just, if you look at thoughts on a functional MRI or thoughts that arise from certain stimulus, you can see neurons firing. And so the thoughts that you're confronting are rising out of your nervous system. And that's what you confront with that level of yoga. On the physical side of things, of course, very much to do with the way in which our body is patterned and the type of patterns that the yoga practice is trying to create, if you will, or undo. We do that through our nervous system as well. So in other words, I mentioned, like, for instance, dancers who have a very particular way of moving, perfectly designed for dancing. They have this ingrained neuromuscular pattern, in other words, within the nervous system. And so when they come to the mat, it's that pattern converging against whatever the pattern of the practice is, right? The way in which we move. And so you kind of get this play between coming up against the old pattern that's embedded in the nervous system and then laying down and creating a new pattern. The idea with the yoga practice is that the pattern that we lay down is more balanced, equalized in terms of going forward, backward, sideways, and twisting. That's the very anatomical answer to it. And the nervous system, especially the spinal cord itself, is often associated with the main energetic channel. And so by working on the physicality itself and stimulating the nervous system and calming it at the same time, you kind of play a game with it that could lead to a much longer conversation. But it's this play that starts to bring our attention and our awareness inward to what's going on. So just getting on a mat and doing a practice all of a sudden starts to make you very aware of how your body moves and how it functions. And so it's already pointing you in a direction. How do you experience yourself? Through your nervous system. How do you move yourself? Through your nervous system. So it's this kind of feedback loop. And then, of course, your nervous system is connected to your mind. So over a long period of time, it starts to have an effect on how you think, how you approach things, how you look at life, potentially. Did that answer your question? Yes?
Yes, I have no background in yoga, but they have all the many different styles or schools. Could you basically give us an overview of what?
Be here a while.
Well, there's yeah, they told me I'm not allowed to go over an hour or they'll cut me off. So there's There's different types of yoga. I'm assuming, though, you're probably keeping it contained within the physical type of practice? Yes, you are, yeah. Good, that makes the conversation a lot shorter. There's basically, there's what people refer to as a classical Hatha yoga style. I mentioned early on that my Tai Chi teacher sent me off with a book called Shivananda's Companion to Yoga. That's generally a very classical Hatha yoga style, which means that Hatha means forceful. It means uniting oppositions. Particularly, it's referring to energy in the body, but that's, again, another conversation. And bred out of that now are a number of styles. So everybody who's laid down a mat and jumps around on it is doing some style of Hatha yoga. And I mentioned also that I do Ashtanga yoga. Ashtanga yoga is both a style of physical practice that fits inside of a much larger container, along with Hatha yoga, called the 8 limbs or the royal path of yoga. So there's lots of different styles now. It's like flavors of ice cream. Whichever one you're attracted to, go for that one. Start there. Yeah.
Just going back to the anatomy and the nervous system, my question is, do any anatomical imbalance that you correct with yoga, for instance, and with appropriate aligning and everything, can that change your psychology? Can it affect the way you?
There's plenty of books that discuss things like posture related to emotion, related to psychology. So there definitely seems to be a lot of information suggesting that it is true, that is possible. And I look at people that I know that have been practicing yoga for many years, and the effects that it has had on them, both physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. So I have no personal doubt. I can't quote you scientific research on it. But keep in mind that, being the anatomy guy, the purpose of yoga has always been and will always be spiritual evolution. The health benefits have always been a side benefit of it. We have taken that side benefit and just blown it up, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that either. It's used as therapy. It's used in psychology. It's a great tool. That's the point. You use it for how it's appropriate for you as an individual. And so, yes, it can definitely change the psychology.
It's just that I was thinking that, you accumulate tension, for instance, or stress. Some people tend to accumulate it in different parts of the body. So you change your anatomy, the way your muscles are, are together. So if you balance that out, maybe you start feeling more open or something.
There's something to it. I mean, just physical exercise alone of just about any type reduces stress, which has a psychological effect. Just take it at the most basic level. Yeah. Any other questions?
So as a teacher, and you're talking about every individual having their own individual idiosyncrasies in terms of movement, how do we recognize, because we are giving these general alignment suggestions or teaching them and creating that grounding and that lift, and yet you can see in warriors rotating your hips or opening them, and then there's those people that have a little bit more curvature of the spine and more flat.
Right.
Is there a way in terms of recognizing that as a teacher to assist or be able to, not that you want to classify them, but you do want to assist them, and there is a classification. I'm always talking about lengthening the spine and creating that lift, but some people are more prone to or able to do it, and other ones are more not understanding. And the same with the rotation. So as a teacher, how do we assess it correctly and be able to?
Should we just start a teacher training? It's a great question. As a teacher, you have to start where you're at anyway, and what it is that you see, and just work with that, and of course gain experience. That's a simple answer to it. As you develop more skills and understand anatomy and see, if you're, it sounds like you're already seeing those individual nuances anyway, which is, I can't really address every potential issue that happens there, but, or I should say, no. I do cover enough principles that it should give you some ideas of what to do. There's no hands-on adjustments in this book. That's a video I did, but. Sorry to plug that. Yeah, it's on a video, so I should. Yeah. Again, like I said, I really try to lay out principles and concepts that you should be able to take, and then you're going to look more closely at your students anyway. You're going to look at your own practice more closely anyway. And just go from there. Just keep studying and working with students, and be willing to explore things with your students. Don't be shy about that. I always find they appreciate it. I do it all the time. I ask for feedback. We're not supposed to know everything. Yeah, we just think we should.
Actually, from a vantage point of a student, you as a teacher may never know what actually connects with us, or a certain word or a certain description, and you'll never know. And they may be very rare, but I was just thinking about 3 things that the teacher probably never knew that I actually got, or it made me think. Because, for example, one was, you need to listen more. And I went sort of like, what? I listen fine. But actually, I was not. And I've thought about that so many times, but I've never told her, and she's now in another state. But so these seeds are planted, whether we know it or not. So
Yeah, it's true.
Encouragement.
Every now and again, it comes back to the teachers, though, which is nice. Yeah.
David.
Yeah.
In the context of listening and seeing and anticipating, say a few words about the way in which we challenge our bodies in various activities like yoga and gymnastics, and the influence that this knowledge could have on injuries. Because there are injuries that occur sometimes, and of course I see them.
Yeah, of course. Very hot topic right now on social media and the internet, and of course, the broad picture is that more people than ever are doing yoga. I often refer to it as a big experiment going on. We don't know where it's going. We don't know how it's going to end. We don't know where. In regards to this book, relative to injuries, I did try to cover the most common injuries, which we can break down into basically 3 places: lower back, knees, and shoulders. So in those sections in particular, I tried to take my time and point out a number of things to get people thinking about, how they're practicing, what type of practice they're doing, paying attention to certain things if they have students, and how those things are playing out. Because certainly, we'd like to avoid getting injured while practicing yoga. It's a good idea. We want to continue practicing. So, I definitely cover some injuries in there as much as possible. Yeah. Yes.
I have 2 questions, and I'm going to string them together.
Okay.
One is, can yoga enhance physical and mental energy? And the second is, say you're not so young, like maybe you've got 60 in sight. Is it too late to start yoga?
They'll answer for me. And I happen to agree with them. It's never too late. It's funny with yoga, and the teachers in the room will all laugh in a moment. The number one reason people are not willing to start yoga is because they say they're not flexible enough. Which is ridiculous, of course, because it's one of the reasons why you might start a yoga practice. It's the exact opposite. So, my teacher in India is famous for saying everybody can practice. Like any age you can take practice, no problem. It's only lazy person can practice. That's it. So and as I said to her as well, there's no doubt about it changing your physicality, your mentality, all of that. if you practice consistently. Once a week is a good start, but it's only going to take you so far. It doesn't even have to be that much. People think all the stuff that we load onto ourselves, oh, I have to practice for an hour and a half every day, it's got to be a really strong practice, whatever those stories are, just let them go. Just show up, do what you can. It's that simple.
David, I have a question that actually came in from one of our internet viewers.
Oh,
Her
there's
name
people
is,
watching.
That's right.
All
People
right.
are. Her name is Claudia Azula. She said in the book you point out the anatomical problems of women wearing high-heeled shoes. And I'd like to you explain what it is why women should avoid wearing pointed, tight-toed, high-heel shoes. Aside from the obvious.
Does Claudia know that I'm in Miami? Claudia! Oh my goodness. Wow. Well, of course, I do actually point something interesting out about being on an incline. And basically, what happens when you stand in high-heeled shoes is your body's designed to be leaning forward, not standing upright. So your whole body within the gravity field has to change and therefore create certain tensional patterns in your body that are not great long term. Let's just say that. Yeah. So, yes.
As a practitioner, as a teacher, I haven't seen the book yet. I'm really excited.
It's right there.
I want to have it so bad. How can I get the most juice out of it? Should I use it as a manual? Should I go chapter by chapter? Can I skip? How?
Well, I'll refer back to things I've said previously. Use it how it best suits you. Some people say it reads like a novel. Anatomy reading like a novel, if I've really pulled that off, I'm a very happy camper. In fact, and don't think I didn't try. It was actually John Scott who told me way back when he knew I was trying to write a book. He's like, David, try to make it as much of a story as possible. And it very much is written like, I wrote it in a conversational tone. I leave out, you know how in the beginning of every anatomy book you have anatomical position and all the words and all. I put it in the back of the book. Because it's the first thing you open a book, an anatomy book to, if you don't know anatomy, and you go, oh my God, I've got to learn all those words. So why put that up front? Put it in the back. You'll learn it along the way. So it's written in a conversational tone. So I would like to think, I mean, it's a little bit bigger than I had planned, to be honest. But it's written in enough of a conversational tone that I think you'll find that it's relatively easy reading if you just go through it. Let me know. Let me know. You will, I think. Another question?
Could you share about your own personal practice, not so much as a teacher, but as a yogi, and how you link sort of the body and mind, and where this has taken you, this whole research and study and practice has taken you sort of spiritually?
Well, I would say, when I first started practicing, it was, I've had this bend towards sort of physical/spiritual practices for some time, since high school. So there's always been something to that, of course. But when I started doing my current practice, which is Ashtanga, if you don't know what Ashtanga is, for instance, it's a fairly vigorous practice, very physical, and at the same time, it's entrancing. And I remember doing the first sunset. When I first got introduced to my practice, I was used to doing Shivananda type yoga, and in Shivananda, between each posture, you lay down in Shavasana, and while you're in the postures, you breathe with your belly going out. You're supposed to do belly breathing. So I now do the complete opposite practice, right? You're supposed, in the practice I do now, you hold your stomach in and you do a lift up, jump back, up dog, down dog, jump back through between each posture instead of laying down for 5 or 10 breaths. So when I met it, it was quite physical and challenging and totally just grabbed me in. I mean, there was no way around it. But I'll say that my real sort of look behind the curtains was when I met John Scott. Because when I showed up to John Scott, I had probably been practicing for right around a year and a half to 2 years, somewhere in there. It was the end of 2001. And he looked at me, and the first series that we do in Ashtanga Yoga is called the primary series. And he looked at me and he said, David, you have a full primary series, but no breath and no bandha. Breathing, as I was saying before, bandha is the energetic component of it. And I, of course, at the time thought I was doing breath and bandha. So he sent me home for 3 months before I came back to teach on the first course with him. And he said, look, forget the postures. Just don't really think about them so much. Don't make them primary. You're going to still do them. But instead, focus on breathing. Just focus on your breath, equal inhalation, exhalation, breathing with sound, all the techniques that we do in the type of practice that I have. And it was like a whole new world opened up. And what revealed itself to me is how internal of a practice it is. And I think it was around that time and at that moment, perhaps, which was a period of 3 months, that it started becoming more of a spiritual practice for me. And so it's only continued to grow from that point on. Even now I try to do a sitting practice on a daily basis, meaning meditation, and that brings it right back to the breath once again, and how subtle it is, and how vastly it expands through our body. And it's this continuous exploration. It's like, there's a universe inside of us if we just quiet down and listen. So, and I think that's where the spirituality goes. It doesn't go out there, it goes in here. And these are the types of thoughts that I have now, which I didn't have then. So I guess that's the path of spirituality that I'm on. Yeah. Any other questions? We okay with time?
Sure.
Yeah?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
Okay, and again, are you still focused at all on Tai Chi? And also, can you discuss Pilates? Because sometimes, people say, oh, I must do Pilates, and then we yogis, and vice versa, all that.
I don't know enough about Pilates to really talk about it. I know enough to know that Joe Pilates understood movement. He understood the body. And I'm sure there was some cross-fertilization with yoga back there when he started it. Yeah. And Tai Chi? I'm just back in touch with my first Tai Chi teacher, Bob Bacher. And let's see, it might be a practice I pick up again. But I think what it did way back when was it really informed very slow and subtle movements in my body. So from that point of view, it was tremendously important for me. But I don't practice it at the moment. Yeah.
David, I actually have another questioner from the internet. This is Marty Rose. He says he tries to do the same Baron Baptiste practice for athletes daily, and he's wondering if he should diversify, and if so, would you have any suggestions?
Personal advice on practice without meeting somebody, not so much in my style. I kind of like to see them move a bit and figure out what practice might be appropriate for them. If you're feeling like you're creating too much of a groove in your practice, like you're creating very strong patterns of movement, then generally speaking, yes, diversify. If you're doing generally forward bends and back bends, make sure you add in twists or sideways movements, etc. So I'm not familiar with that sequence to even be able to say. Sorry. Yeah. Any other questions?
Commenting on the Tai Chi, are there other forms of discipline that also work on the nervous system like yoga, or is yoga really the only way to go?
I think the other movement practices work on the nervous system as well. I don't think yoga is for everyone. Yeah, they all work on the if we're moving and paying attention to how we're moving, then we're working with the nervous system. So. Well, potentially, yes, it is, but it doesn't mean that everybody's going to be attracted to doing yoga, is what I mean. Yeah.
And what do you think about heat in a classroom?
It has its pluses and its minuses. The minuses are potentially that you end up so warm that you can lose some proprioception. In other words, the feeling and the sense of how far your tissues are actually going. I don't know how often it happens. I don't really track that kind of stuff to know. It's a potential problem. Practicing in a very cold room also has problems. You know, your tissues are tight, not warm, and then, you know, so it's finding the happy middle ground. That's where I work from. You know, I don't think a room should be cold. I don't think it should be 105 degrees. I don't think it's necessary, especially in Miami. But depends on humidity levels, you know, all kinds of stuff. You should generate some heat in your practice. Generally good for the tissues to be warm.
What if you're constantly dripping the whole time? And it's not hot Bikram or anything, but you're constantly dripping. Is there something, should you be aware of?
Just make sure you hydrate before. Good advice. In terms of the physicality of it, you know, just be a little bit more cautious, perhaps, if you're really warm, that you're not pushing things too far. Yeah.
About the heat, do you, because you just said that you should generate heat,
Yeah.
and I agree completely that you should generate, but you should generate it. I mean, you should
Yes.
because you're not because the room is hot. Because
Right.
maybe you overheat.
It's possible.
The room is hot, and then you generate heat. And if you are in menopause or something,
You get a little extra burst there. Yeah. Yeah.
it's not good for you. Or if you have pitta constitution, you know, you
Sure.
should not. It's aggravating
Yeah.
your physical.
If you're generating that heat naturally, then it's what's appropriate for you. You could say it that way. Yeah.
It's obvious that you're a seeker of knowledge and that you have a deep understanding of anatomy. So how do you continue to explore the subject of anatomy in a new way?
Good question. I feel like I'm about 10 years behind in studying and staying up. I mean, I try to keep up with what's going on, but a good thing that has happened for science is that it's gotten a lot cheaper to do research. Medical technology has become more refined and easier to access. So there's lots and lots and lots of research out there. The downside of that is somebody's got to try to figure out, you know, how to plow through all of that. And then, of course, you'll have research that's contradictory. So at this point, I mostly try to keep up with what's floating to the surface, what's being talked about on social media. There's a part of me that would love to just spend time digging through research. And, you know, there's always old ideas about anatomy that are changing. You know, we kind of have this belief that, you know, anatomy is somehow fixed and finalized in all of our understanding. We still don't, as far as I know, have a completely valid theory on how muscles contract, literally at the very deep cellular level. I mean, we know how they do it, but exactly how and how it's possible the way that it does, at least when I went through school, it hadn't been figured out yet. So there's a lot of sort of myths out there that have been kind of broken down. So I just try to keep in touch. I'm so busy writing and, you know, traveling that it's hard. People send me stuff, thankfully. People find stuff interesting and they email me a link. Keeps me going. Great.
Was there perhaps one last question before we sign some books? This one more?
A lot of people, and I know you can't do it in Ashtanga, like bringing water bottles to class and drinking water during asana, you know, different postures, and your thought on that and how it cools the body when you're trying to generate heat.
Look, if you're a beginner and you're just getting into a practice and you have to drink a little water while you're practicing, drink a little water while you're practicing. You should just slowly move yourself away from that. And only because of the yogic principles that are eventually trying to trump the physical scientific part of it. So, yeah, in general, yeah. Make it a transition, that's all.
All right, then if there are no more questions, a quick reminder for our internet audience watching at home that you can still call the number on your screen, purchase a copy of the book, we'll get it signed and we'll ship it to wherever you are in the U.S. free of charge. Also a reminder that all of our live streamed events are archived. So if you don't get to watch them live, you can go to the Books and Books website, go to the live streaming link, and any event that we've broadcast from here at the store will be saved there for you to watch at your convenience. For those of you here in the store, we have the book for sale at the counter over there. David will be signing here at the table to the left of the podium, and please let's give him a big hand. Thank you very much. Thank you, David.